President, I'm really pleased today to be rising to speak in support of the importance of an automotive transformation scheme to Australia's economic prosperity and development. If there's one thing that our current government has shown itself to be good at, it's holding back the industries of the future because of an ideology that's based in the past. And one of the biggest casualties of this has been the Australian automotive industry. This is, as we've heard this afternoon, speaker after speaker, an industry in crisis, and it's coming at the cost of Australian workers and their families. The failure of successive Liberal and Labor governments to deal with this issue has had a really serious flow-over effect. Serious money has been poured into the Australian car industry, but it's failed to create the sustainable jobs that we need as we move into the 21st century. It's a disaster that we have seen the major car manufacturers, Ford, Holden and Toyota, making the decision to end operations here. And as the component manufacturers that have been part of the supply chain for these companies close, downscale or shift offshore, this government could well oversee the loss of tens of thousands of Australian jobs. And I don't think the consequences of that and the reality of that has really struck home to people. South Australia and my home state of Victoria are going to feel the brunt of this. I think of Altona, where I grew up, which is home to the Toyota manufacturing plant. And I think of how much of the western suburbs, employment in the western suburbs, is currently dependent on the automotive industry, Toyota and the parts suppliers that are supplying it. I think of the city of Hume, where I worked for 2 years prior to becoming a senator, based around Broadmeadows, where Holden are based. And the consequences in both of these areas that are already suffering extremely high unemployment of having this massive loss of jobs is just it's almost unthinkable to think what it's going to mean to the social fabric and the well-being of people in these parts of Melbourne. The Abbott government, of course, is just staring, waiting for this to happen. And they've poured petrol on this fire, in fact, because with the plans to cut the automotive transformation scheme and no real plans to support the industry's transition. And it's even worse than that, because the vast majority of the $900 million that's currently set aside for the ATS won't actually be spent on supporting these workers. With the car manufacturers making a quick getaway, the government's set to actually pocket around $800 million of that $900 million that should have and could be spent on the industry's transition. Workers in the car and the component industries are driving towards a cliff while we are missing the opportunity to innovate. We just can't keep sitting on our hands. I mean, the Labor Party seems to want to wait until the next election before promising a real alternative. But it will be too late then. The car manufacturers will have gone. We will have gone over the cliff. We have to act now. The Greens have got a plan to shift the industry to the jobs of the future. Greens and jobs of the future are something that we see as critically important to have sustainable jobs in sustainable industries to maintain employment doing socially and environmentally sustainable jobs. This government is refusing to make any serious attempt to cut emissions, while the rest of the world is actually making the move to be reducing pollution, including creative incentives to shift to electric vehicles. And electric vehicles are a very, very substantial part of the transition that Australia needs to be on to be really strongly and powerfully acting on climate change. We know that in order for Australia to play its part as part of the world community in reducing its carbon pollution, we need to be reducing our carbon emissions by 60 to 80% by 2030 to keep up with to be consistent with what the science says. In order to do that, that means that fossil fuels, they've served us well in the past, but they are of the past. We need to be shifting to clean, renewable energy. Clean, renewable solar and wind are what can be powering electric vehicles. So Australia can take up the opportunity to be part of the global electric and alternative fuel car industry. We want to see the establishment of a green car transformation scheme and redirect the existing automotive transformation scheme funding that the government's currently pocketing towards the scheme. So this new scheme would support the component, engineering and design sectors of the industry by removing the current requirements for Australian component manufacturers to be producing components for Australian major vehicle producers to be eligible for assistance, i.e. that we would want to see the component manufacturers to be able to be supplying components into the global market and for them to be eligible for assistance. We would focus assistance on auto parts makers that are seeking to be part of the local or global supply chain for electric, hybrid or alternative fuel vehicles. We'd provide support for any major vehicle producers that are established and invest in South Australia or Victoria. We'd favour applicants who commit to hiring workers from existing car or component makers, and we would enable eligible participants to receive payments in quarterly instalments. Globally, the sales in electric vehicles and hybrids are expected to exceed $500 billion by 2025, and we need to make sure that Australia gets a slice of this. So that's why we would extend funding to 2025 to give the industry the certainty it needs. And with the proper support, some workers in the industry could make the shift into a growing component sector that's oriented towards the global supply chain of electric vehicles. It's estimated that the automotive industry employs 45,000 workers directly and over 100,000 workers indirectly. So our green car transformation scheme would give hope to these workers and their families. The future for the car industry is electric, and encouraging this shift would have enormous benefits for a green economy, for green jobs and for the environment. Electric vehicles, of course, are cleaner, and when they're powered by renewable energy, can have zero emissions. And they can contribute to electricity demand management by providing battery storage to the grid. And they, of course, reduce the pollution that blankets our major cities. They really tick all the boxes. And importantly, of course, moving to electric transport is a necessary shift to combat dangerous climate change. We know that already some Australian-based component producers are joining the world's electric car revolution. In 2012, after receiving government support from existing green and clean energy sources, funds, the Nissan Casting Australia, based in Dandenong South, secured ongoing contracts to produce several complex powertrain castings for Nissan's all-electric Leaf. And this company continues to grow and has a secure future. Another good example is the Australian car parts maker Futurus, which has won a major contract to supply seats for the next generation Tesla battery-powered car due to go on sale in Australia this year. Tesla is taking the motoring world by storm. Engineering for the program is done in Port Melbourne, and it comes on the back of previous contracts with Tesla. And there are other examples. There's a company in Adelaide that is now about to hopefully sign a contract with a solar manufacturer in India, and jobs that were previously in the car industry now into the production of solar technologies. And there are also opportunities, I think, looking in the production of niche vehicles, of not large volume vehicles. The sorts of vehicles like electric buses. We have bus manufacturing that's ongoing in Australia, shifting that production and encouraging the production of electric buses. Electric trucks have also got a major future that the Australian industry could be part of. And another manufacturer that I had discussions with in recent months in Adelaide, which is looking at the manufacture of four-wheel drive vehicles to service police and emergency to produce police and emergency service vehicles. And I was thinking of this manufacturer recently when I was on the parliamentary delegation to Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu and Fiji, where we were hearing stories of how the police operations in these countries, often they haven't got sufficient funding to be able to put fuel in their vehicles. And so when you have people, the people that I was talking to were women suffering from domestic violence who wanted to call the police out, but in fact had to pay the police for the fuel to put in their vehicles. And I was thinking, given the problems of having sufficient funding of these governments, this is going to be an ongoing problem as the cost of oil rises and as the amount of oil, the amount of diesel available in the world decreases. And I was thinking, what an opportunity with electric police vehicles. What an opportunity to actually be lining up our foreign aid with sustainability objectives and to be able to be encouraging the rollout of electric vehicles throughout the developing world, throughout the Pacific as well. These are the sorts of opportunities that we should be thinking quite creatively about, and taking the opportunities and seeing where these opportunities arise and really making the most of them. That's what a successful automotive transformation scheme would look like. It's not about merely propping up an industry of the past. It's about looking to the future and thinking, what next? Where are the opportunities? Where are the jobs of the future going to come from? And how can we best support this transition? The Greens' Green Car Transformation Scheme does this. It would be good for a green economy, good for drivers, and most importantly for this discussion, good for Australian workers.